I know Game of Thrones is over, but it wasn't when we recorded this, back when alienating the audience was a segment on another program. Enjoy. My guest today is Grant Carlisle. He is a former Hill staffer. He's a policy wonk in the field of environmentalism and I think maybe entrepreneurship, something to that effect. It doesn't really matter because we're going to be talking about Game of Thrones today. So we're not even going to get into that policy stuff. Grant, I'm so excited to have you on the program to talk to you about Game of Thrones.
Very excited to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're up to snuff. You've watched the last episode.
Yes.
Okay. And to clarify for listeners, where we are, and if you're listening to this in the future, to where this is, from your vantage point in the past, there's one episode left for Grant and I to watch in this reality. We've got one episode left. So
it's possible we could be even angrier than right now.
It's possible, yeah.
Or we could say they really pulled it off.
Yeah, it'll all be wrapped up in a bow. So the last episode we saw, Daenerys went crazy. And then finally burned everything, and so that's happened. You've enjoyed the series, though, clearly. Like you've been invested in it, right?
I grew up a hard sci-fi geek, and I remember the commercials for this, and I was like, oh my God, that looks really dumb. There was like a three-eyed crow in it, and there was incest, and I looked it up a little bit, and I was like, okay, well, this is a dud. Like, HBO's gonna have to start over. And then I watched the season, I think like a lot of people, and got like 4 episodes in. I was like, all right, this is pretty cool. I know the incest. Okay, I'm into it. And then there were dragons, and then I was addicted completely. Yeah. And then I read all the books.
I watched, I think, the first 2 episodes, and then I read the books, because I wanted to read the books, but also I wanted to be that smug guy that could like constantly lecture people about, well, in the books, or like, oh, you'll wait till the red wedding.
You know the phrase, but do you know the lesser river families, the Blackwoods? Come on.
Yeah, but then they went past that. I can't do that anymore, so I'm in the dark like everybody else. The thing that I initially really liked about it, it's fun because it's a sounding board for all sorts of different metaphors, and you can I've heard all sorts of different variants about what Game of Thrones represents. I think the primary one is it's basically just reboiled history plus dragons. Like I look at it and I see 2 things. First, George R.R. Martin was really influenced by, and he owns this, was really influenced by a set of novels set in 14th century France called the Iron Kings. Mm-hmm. So Philip IV, also known as Philip the Fair, who's the guy that whacked all the Templar. And in fact, if you read that book, as I've done, like the Templar, before he's dying, is keeping lists of people to have revenge upon, and you can kind of see where George R.R. Martin borrowed literary devices. Yeah. But the main thing for me is I look and go, that's pretty much straight up Norman England. Mm-hmm. Like there's 7 kingdoms, right? And then an invader came in, and now it's underneath this kind of high king, and hyper violent, all that stuff. There's a Khal who I think is pretty close to being a Khan. It's like the Mongol horde if it came over to England and that kind of thing. But I look at it and mostly see a historical treatise.
I'd completely agree. And I mean, obviously the Lannisters are very much like the Lancasters, the Starks are like the Yorks. It's supposed to be the War of the Roses.
Right.
And
plus dragons and zombies.
Which,
if anything, just makes it an easier history lesson.
Exactly, because you've got to make it interesting.
Yeah.
And I think you're exactly right that the history is supposed to start kind of with the Aegon the Conqueror, is the sort of weird French guy that came over and conquered everybody, and
William the Conqueror,
yeah, basically sort of copy and pasted their whole culture on top of England and made it a little bit more interesting, without, as far as we know, all of the same amount of incest.
Right. Yes, that's probably slightly less incest. Yeah. Probably equal amounts of murder and terror, but less incest, I would imagine.
I think it's a lot of historical allegories. I mean, there's certainly some great Scottish history as well with the Red Wedding, and Scottish people tend to.
Oh, so I didn't actually know that one. What's the Carlisle?
Oh gosh,
when I think of Scots, I think of the wall, because there too, there's Hadrian's Wall.
Hadrian's Wall, and apparently that was the original thought. I read something where I think it was in Scotland in 1980, and they stood on the wall, and he imagined the Roman soldiers standing there a couple of millennia before, and looking out and saying, this is the end of the world. Yeah. This is everything beyond this, and our ancestors.
Go beyond that, it's all naked blue people. We don't want anything to do with them. We're going to build this wall, stop those folks.
Exactly.
What's the Red Wedding then?
Failed miserably. So, gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the Campbells. Yeah, the Campbells.
Sounds like them.
That's why the Campbells are so notorious, because they brought some people in and I think murdered literally, like it actually might have been worse than the Red Wedding, because there were a bunch of...
They made him marry the guy?
There were a bunch of... Anyway? Yeah, there were a bunch of women and children. Because the Campbells had not come and sworn fealty to some new English king, and I can't remember which one it was.
The Campbells were... in favor of the incoming English king, as I recall, because the Highland clans were rooting for Auld King Jimmy. And the Campbells were the ones that were kind of
You're
doing
right.
English
The Campbells
bidding.
were the ones that were betrayed the other ones. You're exactly right.
So they're not even today. I think that the job that I was absolute best at in life was as a tour guide at Edinburgh, and one of my first bosses there was a bus guide, and he was driving through the Highlands with a bunch of Americans in the back, and they went, "Hey, can you tell us some stories about the Highlands?" And he went, "I'll tell you some stories. Never trust a Campbell. I'll tell you why." And he literally spat on the floor of this bus. It's like, "Oh, the Campbells are a bunch of English healing, lying scum." And he went through this whole thing about how scummy the Campbells. And there was just dead silence in the back of the bus, and he goes, "Do any of you have Scottish background?" And everyone raised their hand, and he's like,
"I'm a Campbell."
"Why are you here?" And they were there for a Campbell family reunion.
Was someone just like, it's the soup? Is that the soup?
Yeah. Well, so let's jump into the politics, because I feel like Game of Thrones is also a good, there's all sorts of good built-in political analogies to it, political metaphors for it. So like the wall, I feel like that has immediate ramifications in the current political environment, because we're debating building a wall to keep out the Picts at the southern border, lest all the naked blue people come in.
I think it's just really an allegory for like an end to the world. I think really that's what he was thinking about. Not so much a barrier to like all of the sort of like, to the Roman soldiers back in the day, the sort of like magical evil forces that lay beyond, and everything beneath it was civilization. And then, of course, he cooked up all of these other histories are sort of mashed together. I think the most interesting way that the politics really play a part is sort of taking a tour through all of these different government systems.
Yeah.
And the sort of medieval thought of, well, if you have a good king, there's all these sort of like circles, and they all line up, and then the heavens are coming down to earth.
That Arthurian idea that the moral integrity of the king has a direct influence on the health and well-being of the country.
Exactly. And what country did that not exist in? You had the Son of Heaven myth in China that existed into the 20th century. I mean, every time, they say that there would be like disturbing signals when, there was a bad crop failure or something, and everyone says, well, God must not like the king. So everyone just kind of looks at that. And then there's a couple of other sort of ways that they look at leaders. You have the, Khal Drogo, for instance, on the grasslands, who's sort of a dictator, Khan-like figure. You have
Horse warlord, yeah.
Horse warlord, yeah. Even the Night's Watch and their like little democracy that they use, or in Bravos they have.
Bravos is kind of like a free city-state. It's like maybe Venice or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And they have like some form of democracy where sort of like the nobles lead everything, and then all of the free cities, Tyrosh and Pentos, are really getting into deep nerdy stuff now. But we're
already there. Anybody still listening to this point in the podcast where we've gone through Campbell family history and Game of Thrones, they're in for the ride at this point.
They're deep. You do have like sort of elections, although they're comically held up as sort of a farce. And so you get all of these people kind of debating, Littlefinger's thinks everything is just a game, and that you can sort of use politics to succeed. Varys wants to do everything for the realm. I don't know that it's in the books it's going to really go as far that he really is devoting everything.
Yeah,
I think in the show
in the books, at least where they cut off, Varys and Peter Baelish are kind of similar, and they're both schemers. And Varys does give a little bit more lip service to serving the realm, but he ups his game ethically in the actual TV series a lot more.
And I also think in the books that we might find out that he has other motives.
Right. Entirely possible. Although I'll say I have the three groups that I have incredible sympathy for in the series from a political perspective are Varys, who I really like Varys, because from my perspective, being a political orphan, there's all these screaming Lannisters that are like, "Do you hate the Starks?" And I'm like, Lord Hickenlooper's got some pretty good ideas. I like Hickenlooper, okay. I don't like the main Starks, though. And then the Starks like, "You hate the Lannisters?" And I'm like, well, okay. Well, I think, that guy over there, like Meister Sass is okay. I like him. And then they want to kill each other, and they want me to be in the crossroads. So Varys, whenever he's dealing with all of this, and he's like, someone has to serve the realm. I'm like, thank you. Someone has to serve the realm, instead of this weird sociopathic battle going on between these two sides all the time. So I really like him. I really like the wildlings because they don't bend a knee. I dig that. They're the ones who do not accept this power structure. They have nothing to do with it. They're free beyond the wall. Dig them. And I really like the Brotherhood for much the same reasons that I like Varys. Is they're not trying to serve these power conglomerates. They're not concerned with just doing that. Now, granted, there are a bunch of pillaging rapists, and I don't applaud that. However, the basic idea of the Brotherhood I like.
Yeah, and I think really that's playing into his whole idea of getting really deep into what actually happens when you have sort of a civil war that drags all the resources, and it's sort of the grass, the people, the common everyday people that get hurt by all these sort of things trampling over them. And I think that's a big part of why he goes into what sort of happens when you have a civil war like that and all of these lords fighting one another. And he shows in great detail the people starving, them being raped and murdered and taken and tortured for absolutely no reason. It's just really a study in a misuse of power. And I think it's interesting that he, even though it's supposed to be a civil war and certainly there's been wrongs on both sides, he definitely puts those forces forward as sort of the more vicious side of things on the Lannister side that tend to align with them. But some of them are even, I think it's the the people that flay people.
The
Boltons, who end up cutting Jaime Lannister's hand off and almost kill Brienne. So I mean, I think they're really showing. And the Brotherhood, I have trouble with that. I think they're problematic. I think they are like Lord of Light. We serve the Starks, but they are also like robbing and killing and pillaging people. And at the end, are led by a, spoiler alert if you haven't read a book from almost a decade ago, zombie lady with her throat cut.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they don't do that in the series. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm with you. I think that's one of the interesting things for me, for where my political orientation is. I'm very concerned about accumulation of power. I don't like power.
Yeah.
I think that
there really isn't a separation of powers in Game of Thrones. I mean, you could kind of say the Meisters they're advisors. They're professional advisors. They're the bureaucracy, really.
Yeah.
And then the church. I mean, really. One of the interesting things that we haven't even really brought up, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Go for it,
is the power of the church and the basically it has like a resurgence during the Civil War, which I think is a point he's trying to make, that very often in these very stressful times, for instance, like something like the Black Plague in England or something, you had a resurgence in sort of like the people's religion. They sort of took it on themselves, and then you had a lot of sort of like everyday people dying, so the people that survived could suddenly fight for more rights as peasants and say, hey, we're not going to be just peasants anymore, we're actually going to be land-owning farmers. I'm going to own this land of horrible dead, and it's going to be mine. And that was my British accent.
Yeah, very good. You nailed that one, yeah.
So I think that I think that it's great that he sort of shows a battle in the books still looming between these folks that have a sort of like evangelical seven-pointed star religion.
I feel like the faith as portrayed in the series is I view it as very populist. Like I think of
it's become that way, pretty quickly.
But it's very pro the people. Which I'll say in this context makes total sense. If I were living in a feudal era, I'd probably be a lot more populist myself. And I see the High Sparrow as
unless you were a lord, unless you absolutely, and you would not be.
Here I got to jump in here because whenever we get into these discussions, everyone always assumes they're they're one of the lords.
It's true. You're one of the 1%.
Yeah, statistically, my family was literally living in a hole 3 generations ago. We had to dig a hole in the side of a hill in Oklahoma. We're not part of that group. I got really nice blazers today, but that's a new innovation in the Heaton family. We're
Appalachian.
Yeah.
Hill trash. I fully understand.
My surname Heaton means high place, which sounds really great, but I think it just means hillbilly. I think we were like the Norman era hill, as in oh crap, the Heatons are coming. Lock up the cows or whatever.
It's just a misspelling of heathen.
Another possibility. So that's where I'm moving it in now.
We got Carlisle because they arrested us and took us to Carlisle for booking.
Oh,
Before
nice.
that, it was like a Scottish word that meant sheep rapist or something.
Yeah, great. I'd love to see your sigil. That'd be an interesting family crest, Grant. I see the faith as this sort of populist element. I see the High Sparrow as a kind of Bernie Sanders character because he's very much a true believer. Yeah. He's an authentic guy. He means what he says, but he's also stirring up all this stuff. And in my view, being problematic in that regard.
But also accumulating power to himself.
Absolutely.
In so doing.
Which is, I think, one of the big takeaways from Game of Thrones is this relationship with power. Now, George R. R. Martin, and I don't know what his politics are, but he is clearly skeptical of people that want power, and he's clearly skeptical of the accumulation of power, both of which are observations that I share. Matt Welch, a friend of mine, had a great metaphor that I've just flat out stolen a few years ago, which is that a lot of the time, Republicans and Democrats want to have power. They just want to use it to do different things. The Republicans maybe want to use it to sort of shape shape the culture. They want to try and maintain whatever the existing structure was.
Yeah,
Democrats
this
want to
point and no further.
Yeah, and Democrats want to redesign the economic structure. And to borrow Matt's phrase, like I view it as like Frodo's ring. I want to throw that thing into the volcano. I think power's bad, and I don't trust anybody with power.
Well, when has there been a time that people didn't have power? After when we were like tribes, walking around.
Well, I think like you have to, like, I'm not an anarchist. Although, again, I'm sympathetic to the wildlings north of the wall. I do dig their thing.
But they have power. They have a power structure.
They do.
They have like a weird.
However,
they are kind of democratic too in a way.
And I'll say they definitely have right of exit. Like that is a recurring thing for them.
They can just leave.
Yeah. If you, like, what do you want to do?
Pretty
You're
common.
Our king now? No, I don't like you as my king. I'm going to go like hang out with the flat-footed guys that eat babies or whatever. Like they've got that option of they can leave and take off.
Yeah.
You've got a good point. There's always going to be power, but the power is not the same level. It's not always the same accumulation, nor is it distributed the same way. So my ideal would be a low level of power by force that's fairly evenly distributed and ideally set up to fight itself. That way there's no one person exercising it. So if I were all of a sudden Varys, I'd be like, maybe we should elect the king from a group of electors, and there'll also be, there'll be some sort of Meister that exercises individual rights, and you can't, that kind of thing. So there are periods where we've got that. Whereas, in Game of Thrones, it's flat out despotism. I mean, it's one of the things that I think they do a good job of portraying is that there's not really rule of law. I mean, now the Queen of England can't just go, you know what, I don't like taxes. We're not having taxes anymore. She can't unilaterally do anything. Whereas it used to be that, okay, like you're not supposed to inherit the throne, but because you're a bastard, but you've got an army, so just kill whoever has it, and you're now the guy in charge.
Someone will tell you you're not a bastard.
Yeah, someone will kill enough people, and eventually you
have
become
enough money, kill enough people, someone will tell you that you're not a bastard. Yeah. Not so different from today.
Yeah, so I see I see it like as a relationship of power a lot of the time, and then generally being skeptical on that. But let's jump into a couple of other analogies we can touch base on. White Walker. This had not occurred to me, but White Walkers as bearers of climate change.
As someone who works in climate change policy, who works in energy policy,
You don't think this is a great analogy?
I think this is ridiculous. I don't know. I just don't know what they'd be trying to say.
Yeah.
If the White Walkers are a metaphor for climate change. And they ride giant ice spiders. So are those like wind turbines? Are the Dothraki solar panels that attack them? I don't
exactly. All of
I
this
don't
is
get it.
Straight up. Like I'll say, like it's unlikely.
I'd welcome it, but I think he thought of that in like the mid '80s before climate change was a big thing.
Yeah, I think.
I suspect.
I think that if he's going for any analogy, I think it's a historical one. I think he's mostly working with historical metaphors. I've found that to be an interesting conversation, but it breaks down very quickly if we're getting into climate change, because then it's like, we got to kill the Night King. What is he? Is he petroleum? Like, what's the thing that we got to kill here? It breaks down. Although I do enjoy this kind of. The zombie element, because that's what the White Walkers are. They're zombies, right? And I'm interested in the kind of...
Well, they're not... Sorry.
Yeah.
The Whites are zombies.
Okay.
The White Walkers are ice demons. We're not exactly sure.
Yeah.
They were people at one point.
There's some kind of mythical super being, as opposed to the roving corpses that have been reanimated, right?
Exactly. It turns out if you have like obsidian in your home, don't touch it because it'll turn you into a White Walker.
Right. They should put warning labels on them, 100%.
When you buy that at
don't put
a
it in your
National Park
sternum.
gift shop, there needs to be like a little warning label. Will turn into an ice demon forever.
Yeah. But I'm interested in that for the same reason that I'm interested in, or was interested, I lost interest in The Walking Dead. There is this mass cultural appeal of zombies. There's some sort of innate fear that we have. I think it's one of two things. It's either fear of being eaten, or I think it's fear of contamination, which I think is an evolutionary thing that we still have in us. And I think that manifests as the zombie thing. I also think it manifests as xenophobia. So I look at the wall and I see a lot of these.
They are literally called the others. In the books.
The other. Pretty good. Pretty good othering right there. But I think that there's this impulse of like, we can't, if we let in some foreign group, it's going to have a pathogen which will infect us culturally, or we might learn Spanish.
Yeah.
And then God forbid that we become bilingual.
Yeah, I think it's partially a fear of, the other. I think of being eaten is probably a really visceral fear. And also, just encountering other human beings, but that have zero emotions and are just like automatons is kind of terrifying.
So now it's just like an autism metaphor that we've got into?
Automatons. Is the word I
Okay, all
use,
right, yeah.
ladies and gentlemen. Not
Okay.
your word.
My word.
Anti-vaxxer. No. I think that's probably the metaphor. And with the White Walkers, I've always thought he is. George R. R. Martin obviously is known to be a huge fan of Tolkien, but he's also a huge fan of Shakespeare. And there's a lot of allusions to a lot of the plays in the books. I think the White Walkers. We're at the fifth book now. There's only
sixth
two
book's
more.
never coming.
They didn't cross the wall in the show until the very last season. They just crossed the wall. I think it's kind of meant to be like a metaphor or allegory, I guess, to Hamlet a little bit. So like this other army is approaching the castle the whole time, and like you keep on hearing about it again and again and again. I think it's and meanwhile you're focused on sort of the madness inside the castle and all of these little things that are going on. When no one's really considering that this whole army is approaching. I think that's more of the sort of metaphor that they represent, just this external threat just approaching them at all times.
Yeah. While
they are all over the place with their various conflicts. And it's just George R. R. Martin, so I'm sure has a team of editors, but needs a lot more, and so he's packs in as much. I mean, how many times can one man write about lemon cakes and leeks and lampreys?
My big problem with the books, I enjoyed the book series, and when you're through reading them, it's like you just got out of a long-term relationship because they're so engrossing and there's such a time investment. But it did drive me nuts right after the Red Wedding. You've had the Red Wedding, you've had Tyrion Lannister killed, or not Tyrion, I'm sorry, Tywin. Yeah. And you've had I think 2 other people died. And you're like, this is amazing. I can't wait to read the 4th book. And then George R. R. Martin goes, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I introduced a whole new cast of characters you don't know in another part of the world you don't care about? Let's do that for a whole book.
Yeah.
It drove me nuts. I don't think he's going to write the 6th book either. My theory is, I think it is not as good as the series that's currently unfolding on HBO. He knows that.
God, I hope that's not true.
He doesn't want to, he's like, I'm just going to go ahead and run out the clock on this one. I'll probably die.
Well, he put up a blog post because a lot of people were accusing him basically of holding back on publishing the books until the show, that he made some sort of corrupt bargain with the showrunners that he would not issue the books while the show was going on. And he said, I make millions of dollars. Every time I release a book, I would release the book if it was done. Basically admitting, I have a problem. I can't stop. I mean, he's written 2 other books while he's been trying to finish the 6th book.
Okay.
So I think what I hear.
Well, but he did that in conjunction with other authors, right? That's the prequel thing that he wrote? Because there's some, I can't remember what it is, a Feast of Kings or something, but it's another guy writing it with
A Night
George
of the
R. R.
Seven
Martin.
Kingdoms.
Yeah.
And I think he was involved in it, and then he wrote a big history, and then he wrote Fire and Blood, which I think was just George R. R. Martin.
Oh, okay.
Which is the Targaryen dynasty up to the Dance of the Dragons, which is the Civil War.
Ooh, nice. We have...
I may or may not have read that.
People at home are getting the biggest blast of nerd right now.
I apologize to my parents, to everyone.
Neither of us can go on a date for a month and a half after this episode. We're just going to not expose anybody to it. So I agree with you. I don't think that George R. R. Martin wrote this with any political allegories in mind, but I love pinging them with political allegories.
Yep.
So I'll run a couple more by you.
Just do a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Thumbs down. Yeah, dragons as weapons of mass destruction.
I agree with that.
I think they work pretty well as nukes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just, he's a writer. He's been writing in TV. He's been writing various novels, fantasy and otherwise, for decades. They're just a really good way to move the plot forward. Mm-hmm. If you suddenly are the siege lasted a month. There were plagues, which he does write about that. But then a dragon swoops in and burns everyone. That's pretty fast. Mm-hmm. And you can really move the story forward. It's also a really intimidating way to approach a city or a country or what have you, on Dragonback. So And I agree with you.
And it's a way that you've suddenly upped the game technologically. You've got a form of warfare that beats out any other existing form of warfare.
The Valerians ruled the world for 1,000 years.
Yeah. And then you can also just like completely obliterate a city, as happened in the last episode of Game of Thrones we watched, where she decides to just go ahead and kill everyone. Like we'll do a kill everyone program. Yeah. So what I'm saying is they should have an international dragons agency that tries to limit dragon. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe they had like a really good international atomic agency equivalent, and were able to get dragon proliferation under control to the point where they actually brought them out. Maybe it was intentional.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point.
Because people in power love giving up power, Grant. That is something. You know what? This thing, it can kill a lot of people. I don't think anyone can trust it. Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah, but I mean, eventually, if you have a dragon, you're going to use dragon.
Yeah.
Just like nuclear weapons. Sorry, everybody. We're all going to die. I mean, that's the horrible thing about this. You know, people. that ball wants to be bounced. Once you have something in your arsenal, you're going to have to use it. So I'm not sure how well that would work. And the Valyrians definitely use them a lot. They didn't give them to anybody else ever, but they use them a lot.
Yeah, whereas we've given them to a couple of allies, and then we're doing okay. How worried about nukes are you?
Oh gosh,
I am fairly worried.
So many other problems that I don't think about them. That is a weird thing about our generation. So again, I work in energy policy, and you see a real generational difference actually between the folks that are working in environmental policy and are seriously worried about nuclear power because they grew up with 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, which was Chernobyl happened the year I was born, and then I'm the.
But you have
climate
nothing
change.
to do with that, though. That's not your fault. Don't feel bad, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, don't tell anybody otherwise.
Okay, yeah.
We're the climate change generation, and every generation after us will be. So like nukes sound kind of nice. It's a slow,
kind of sexy.
It's a slow boil or a microwave. You can choose it either way. I hope that we are able to. Severely limit the amount of nuclear weapons in the world. I think it's a much safer place if we're able to do that.
We'll probably do another episode on that. We've done a couple where I've mentioned Stanislav Petrov or Petrov Stanislav. I can't remember which way it is, but he's we basically, in one of the instances which we nearly went to World War III, he was a Soviet lieutenant colonel or something that, and his data said, nukes are flying, time to release the nukes, and he went, something off about this. I don't think this is right. You know what? If World War III is happening, everyone's going to die anyway. I don't want to be the guy that kills anybody. And so he literally saved mankind from nuclear annihilation because a microchip that was like 30 cents had gone out. Like they were buying stuff from the Soviet equivalent of Radio Shack back in the 80s. And thank God that guy was there. So I worry about that. But it is a little bit astray from the Game of Thrones thing. I'll say another element that strikes me of Game of Thrones is when Daenerys is wandering around the various free cities, and what I can only assume is George R.R. Martin buying time because it gets very repetitive.
I think he's showing her how to. He's trying to introduce how you go from being a conqueror to a ruler.
Okay.
Because Meereen is really the first place, and I think they discussed this quite at length, that she has to actually rule a city, and one that it really does not like her and does not have a history of. Well, they were controlled by Valyrians a long time ago, but these slaver cities have been free for a century or two now. And reasserted their sort of like slave kingdoms.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a decent analogy for Iraq. Because like with Iraq, like America's great at conquering stuff. We're unparalleled at that. We're really good at coming in and toppling a regime if we want to do it. We're not great at ruling it afterwards. The
and very few people are.
Yeah.
The British were pretty good at it, but not for very long. And I'm going
to say anything touching Afghanistan, just don't even bother. I would that is the graveyard. Like the only person that was able to hold it and hold it well was Alexander the Great. He went into what would it have been at the time? Pharyngia. I can't remember what we called it. It wasn't Afghanistan, but he went in there, conquered the people, married a local lady. So maybe if Rumsfeld had gone in and married a warlord's daughter, we could have sealed that deal, but he didn't. Way to not take one for the team, Donald Rumsfeld. But yeah, otherwise, the occupation not going super well. Yeah.
No, and I think it's. I don't quite know why we're spending all the time there, but I think it's all a device to keep her there so she can end up getting the Dothraki army.
Okay. Yeah.
I think if I had to guess.
Okay.
I'm not sure what else that metaphor is. I don't see any signs of madness in her. On the Great Pyramid as she's trying to save people and they have plague victims outside and she's going to visit them.
Yeah,
it's a little.
She seems
off.
great. Up at I did not see her going mad coming at all. In fact, the two episodes ago when Varys and Tyrion are like, she's clearly going crazy. We need to poison her. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're just occasionally she gets kind of a crazy eyes look.
Also, what are you going to do with the dragon once she's dead? Do you think the dragon's just going to sit around? I guess Jon could just grab it.
Yeah.
But dragons don't usually like that. Also. This is unfair to Jon. I will say that before I say it, but I thought maybe fake a kiss a little bit better with her.
Yeah.
So she doesn't burn the whole city?
Can I say, the two biggest villains in this whole series at this point are Bran and Sam, because if they just shut the hell up, everything would be fine. If they didn't do it, first of all, Daenerys is barren, isn't she? At least she is in the books. They highly sort of prophesy that she's going to be barren.
They highly hint at that she will not be
Which
it.
is to say, no
meeting of ice and
worries about
fire.
an inbred baby happening. It's fine. So if John didn't know,
I mean, by Targaryen standards, barely inbred.
yeah, it's still pretty good.
Antness.
Even by Habsburg standards, it's okay. So like if they had told
R.I.P.
John would be in love, it would solve all these problems because they'd get married, he'd balance her out, she wouldn't have gone crazy and burned everything. Well done, Bran. Like good job, like floating around in your flying crow warging.
I was kind of hoping that Bran would turn back time. I'm just picturing him in that dancing on a battleship.
Yeah, that's immediately what I immediately thought as well was him.
I'm sorry, Bran. But I thought he was going to stop time during the battle and turn it back and be like, John, you must, kiss her better or something, or tell her like you love her, or just be better. He just winces at stuff a lot and has a samurai haircut.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a samurai haircut.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. So we've got maybe 10 minutes left.
Okay.
I'm gonna throw people at you. I want you to tell me who they
Literally, because you
exactly.
have a bad back.
I'm gonna go over there and hoist Laura over my very, very strong shoulders, and then toss her over the table at you. No, I'm gonna throw names of Game of Thrones at you. I want to hear who they remind you of in contemporary politics.
God, okay.
So Peter Baelish.
Oh, so many people.
I feel like he's sort of the consummate political insider.
Yeah.
It's just pushing for him.
I would say McConnell, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps unfair. I think McConnell's probably a little bit more responsible. God, that's going to hurt me sometime. But
well, you know what? I'll give you this. Like, I think in general, I'm not. I'm surprisingly neutral on McConnell. I'm not a McConnell fan, but I don't like read his stuff. No one's but I think in general, like the Senate Majority Leaders and Speakers of the House, they're not. Like they're the vice principals of the school. It's not their job to be liked. It's their job to get stuff done.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, I disagree with whatever they're trying to do. I'm not giving them a pass. I'm just saying like they're never going to be like you're never going to have like a super popular Speaker of the House or Majority Floor Leader.
No, I completely agree. I think speakers have the much more probability of being popular because I think that people understand what a speaker does. For a majority leader, they don't really get it. And also the Senate is, at least now when we still have the filibuster, is a much, much harder place to manage. It's not just a majority vote. So they have to do a lot more sort of arm twisting. I think with McConnell, it's that he doesn't have much of a political philosophy that I've ever seen in action. There's not issues that he cares deeply about beyond just accruing power
Beating
to
the Democrats, I think, is his top goal.
accruing power to himself. I think Harry Reid and he were. It's funny how history kind of puts people together like this. That they were very equal in their like skullduggery to one another. But Harry Reid had issues that he deeply cared about, like clean energy, for instance, in Nevada, and labor rights, and et cetera, foreign policy issues. And he was just as much of a partisan as McConnell is, but he had things to care about. McConnell's just kind of like, I like things.
Yeah, that's a great McConnell impression.
I'm sorry.
All right, good. So we got to have, let's say, all right, who would John be?
Oh, gosh.
This is where I ask you to put your faith in princes, basically, because anybody you say has to be like a wonderful person, right?
John might be Buttigieg.
Ah, okay. All right.
Yeah, he came from, or maybe like O'Rourke.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I guess any of the folks that didn't come from like one of the royal families of America and are now
Kennedys and the Bushes.
Yes, and think that it's power is hoist, that they are born with it, that they actually have to earn it themselves. So there's actually be a number of lawmakers. Now, are they as like squeaky clean as him? I don't think so. Did they have affairs with wildlings? Probably not. But I think it's that's about as close as we're going to get.
I think I'm trying to think who my figures would be. I don't. I find that as soon as if I put up a poster of a politician in my house, I'm confident that the following day, like we'll find a body in their basement or something. I try not to get like hung up on hopes and aspirations of a politician. Which, and actually, to back up with the Game of Thrones thing, something you brought up at the very beginning is this Arthurian mindset that if there's a righteous and true leader, that's going to be the thing. And I dismiss that as just basically mythical nonsense.
I think it's medieval PR. The good kings that were trying to sell themselves as good kings would say, I'm a great king, that's why good things are happening. And then it didn't, human beings, they were probably a little less educated than us, but they're not dumb. They said, okay, well, the inverse is if anything bad ever happens because of a king, we're going to blame that person. And so you set up this kind of myth, and then their successor, who's often their son or grandson or whatever, couldn't live up to that because something bad happened.
Do you know Byzantine history very well?
I know it's Byzantine.
Yeah, it's very. Byzantine history is fantastic. It's like I did my undergraduate was in history, and I focused on the British Empire and the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire is Roman Empire Part 2.
Yeah.
So Roman Empire falls.
They thought of themselves as Romans.
Yeah, they were. Like, the Roman Empire split, and the Western
Romans with more
Empire
clothes
falls
on.
in 410, I think. And then the Eastern Empire goes till 1343. There was a long stretch of time where the prevailing national mythology was that the emperor, the Eastern Roman Emperor, the Byzantine Emperor, was God's lieutenant on earth, and a kind of Christ-like icon, to put it in Greek Orthodox terminology. So basically, he needed to not just be a good person, but he needed to be visually appealing, and so you could remove someone from the line of succession if you cut their nose off. So you had this 400-year period where you would just have somebody grab your older brother, cut his nose off, and then blind him, and then that guy's out. And then finally, one guy blinded with his nose cut off, climbs out of a tower, organizes an army to slaughter his family and go back in. It's really good Game of Thrones type stuff with a lot of nose cutting off. Let's see. How about Joffrey? Who would that be?
Oh God!
I'm going to say Justin Bieber. I realize that's not politics.
We're able to do that. Again, several people. I would say Kim, which one of the Kim? I mean, any of the Kims in North Korea, just spoiled from the start.
Yeah,
lives outside of reality.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Maybe Jeremy Corbyn too. I could see it either
Really?
way.
Joffrey is Jeremy Corbyn?
No,
I like that. I'm not a big Corbyn fan, so that's shots fired at Corbyn. Sure.
I think anyone that lives outside of has absolutely no idea what's going on really, but is sort of insulated by the power that they already have, can be a little bit of a Joffrey. Maybe not so murderous.
Who's Eddard Stark then? Is Eddard Stark like a Jeff Flake or someone that like questions the existing thing and gets his head cut off for it, or
or like Barack Obama with Merrick Garland, who's just a good man.
So Merrick Garland is the Ned in this equation?
Oh, I don't even know who. I think Merrick Garland is the John Aaron. We're getting real deep now.
Yeah.
But just everyone basically acknowledges as a good man, as an honorable person. I think Jeff Flake or Ben Sass or something would be. But for whatever reason, because of the times they live in, always being honorable is not the best quality.
Yeah.
You have to. There. I think time
or not being
hyper
partisan, which is again why I rather like Varys, because I feel like I've got a target on my back all the time because I'm not in the tank for a team, and that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
So I'm like, poor Varys. Yeah.
But I mean the largest group of American voters, it either is right now or it will be very soon, are undecided people who don't want to be another party. Now, I think that those people usually vote with one party.
But to clarify, they're probably not undecided. They're independent.
But they're just waiting for a Macron to come along, or God help us, a Le Pen. Well, I guess we kind of have that. But
yes, we already have a Le Pen. We've already got one of them, or at least a Bannon would be the equivalent. I think you're right in terms of polling, because we've covered this on the show several times. The largest political bloc is independent. It's about 40% right now. So there are more independents than there are Republicans or Democrats. However, as you also point out, we don't know within that bloc how much of them are leaning. It would appear to be a significant amount that nonetheless have a default position. Although I don't as an independent, I completely sympathize of going well, I'm probably going to vote for X party, but they're so terrible I refuse to be a member of that party. Which I take as a big sign of the political parties to quit being so horrendously awful and led by sociopathic.
Talk to anyone on the street, and they'll someone who votes for Republicans 100% of the time, and they'll say, "I hate Republicans.
Yeah.
I hate the Republican Party. I hate everything about them." But they would always vote for them.
Yeah.
And the same exists on the Democratic side as well.
No, absolutely.
But I think a lot of those people, if you did have an alternative like a Targaryen coming across the narrow sea, might pick that person. Suddenly, that person who's just been kind of a faraway thing approaching seems like a good bet, and they've got a dragon. If someone has a dragon,
so I think the equivalent would be no one likes Democrats or Republicans, but if the Queen of England shows up with nukes and it's just I'm taking back America, there'd be a bunch of people who are all right, let's try that out. She's got cool
popular.
hats.
She's popular.
Yeah, she's pretty popular. Yeah, I'd
Howard Schultz imagined he was going to be that person.
I've got a soft spot.
I brought coffee.
I've got a soft spot for Howard Schultz, and I feel like the immediate visceral push against him was we all hate you. How dare you Democrats despise you, and how dare you not run as a Democrat? And I was like, what? Like, because you all hate me. Of course I'm not going to run as a Democrat. Like, why would I do that? This is why we need ranked choice voting. We need ranked choice voting.
Oh, okay.
This nonsensical stuff.
Everywhere?
Yeah, everywhere. Like definitely in presidential elections. I would, because I'm part of that small group of those independents that really doesn't have a default position. I've kind of, I used to be a Blue Dog Democrat when you and I met. There are Republicans I like. There are Democrats. I don't see it as a spectrum. I see it more as like a big coalition of like 15 teams, and I like the problem-solving caucus, and I like the Blue Dog caucus. So I don't really fit anywhere. I'm not a part of that clique. I would welcome something shaking up the system. I like ranked choice voting because I am probably going to be a spoiler at some point. I'm not running, but like I'm going to vote for a spoiler if I really despise the two candidates. Or alternately, I might not, but a lot of my cohorts might vote for a spoiler. I'd rather have a system where we could actually go, okay, well, I'm going to vote for Justin Amash, but I know that that's not going to work, so I'm going to have my default position be on Michael Bennet. And then then I'll vote against Trump or whatever it's probably not going to be Michael Bennet, but I can dream that I can dream that the moderate pragmatic Democrats will have a resurgent comeback.
Steve Bullock is running as of today.
Yeah, I don't know as much about Steve Bullock. What's his deal?
He's the governor of Montana. He won when the same year that Trump won Montana by 20 points.
That might be my speed because people forget that a Montana Democrat's different.
And he didn't pull a Jim Justice in West Virginia and do that and then become a Republican.
Oh, right. Yeah. So he might actually be able to govern in a red state as a Democrat?
He has. Okay. I think they've just expanded Medicaid in Montana. It sounds like an endorsement. It's not. I think that they've just expanded Medicaid, I believe, in Montana. That's why he's waited so long to announce. And done some other like sort of Democrat-y
I'll check him out, although I'm hesitant to do so because I'm afraid that if I like him, it will just tank because whoever I like tends to just immediately tank in the polls.
That's a very good allegory back to Game of Thrones as well. As soon as you get to love a character, they are dead.
Yeah, so Tyrion's probably going to die then. My hope is that Tyrion winds up as king. That there's just there's a massive battle, everyone's dead, and then from the smoking ruins, Tyrion stands up and goes, "Well, I suppose I'm king then," and he's the only one left standing.
Very good impression. I think it's gonna be something similar to that because if you look at the War of the Roses, the Tudors were like cousins of the Lancasters or something.
But yeah, they're both wings of the Plantagenets, I think, aren't they? Or
yeah,
no, maybe they had.
But
they're both Tudors.
The connection was really sinewy. It was a long connection for them to get that this person had royal blood and to get in. And then he got an army, and it was a lot easier.
Basically, the Welsh.
And I think he lived in France for a while.
Yeah, well,
Henry III, because they wanted to get him away from all the madness.
I'm going to rant for a second. This is completely unrelated.
For a second, it's for about an hour.
For a second. King Richard the Lionhearted spoke French as his first language.
Yeah.
You know how long King Richard the Lionhearted was in England while ruling England, like as King of England?
2 years.
I think it's 6 months. It's
because he was in because
he was in France all the time. Yeah, because the Plantagenets who came over with William the Conqueror, they viewed England as like the Arkansas of Europe. They wanted it for money, and they wanted to France was where they wanted to be, and like a ton of French kings, like up until. Really late in the game, they were speaking French as their first language.
Yeah. I think the Tudors might have been the first ones to actually speak English full time.
Yeah,
maybe a generation before them.
But it was around then. Yeah, you're right.
That it really became an English kingdom, and it was a breakdown. I think ultimately in religion that made a huge difference in trade ties because alliances started to shift, and all of a sudden, France was the center of Europe until a lot later in its history. It was the biggest population. It had the biggest economy, as much as there was any economy, and it's just
which was mostly just extracting blood from serfs, which was most of the medieval economy. Just how do we exploit
dirt
people?
Being wheelbarrowed around and people crying into it.
Yeah, that was.
But it's massive as well. It's the size of Texas, so that was the big goal. England had always been a backwater, and it continued to be. They just wanted it basically for money, for more taxes, and that's why a third of the English language are French words because they came over and they basically said, "Oh no, we're not going to learn this gross guttural." Pig noises. We're going to continue to speak French. German. You can speak French to us, and slowly it filtered down.
Yeah. A lot of cooking terms, a lot of things like that. You can pick them out. We've gone afield. I feel that we've reached a natural conclusion. We've zigzagged back and forth from Game of Thrones to English history, French history, politics. Grant, it was really fun talking to you. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks very much, Andy.